Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers. It's been a hot minute since I've done a live stream, but today we've got a really cool one in store. We're going to collab with our friend Rob, aka Old Shovel, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of a 90s mountain bike, as well as hopefully end on some tips on how to pick the correct 90s mountain bike for you, because apparently it's a big, like, hairy spaghetti ball of things that you should know. Before we get started, though, if you guys like this content, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, both on Pathless Pell as well as Rob's channel, Old Shovel. And we still got a bunch of stickers and stem caps in our store. As you guys know, I am just a sticker salesman with a YouTube channel. But with all that said, let's welcome Rob to the live stream. How's it going, Rob?
Howdy. Good. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for playing bikes. So before we get into the debate, tell me a little bit more about your YouTube channel, how it started, and what's your kind of vision for it.
Sure. I started my channel, let's see, in December of 2018, and my first goal was actually to do restorations of tools and other things. That was kind of the impetus, and I'd seen a few people doing them and doing them poorly and getting a lot of views. And I thought, I can do this better. So I restored lots of tools. I'm an avid axe collector, and so I did lots of axes. I did my Kona Explosive that I'm assuming several have seen, which was my first bike restoration. I've always been restoring bikes for a long time, and I was a bike mechanic in college, and I found that was kind of more fun. Some companies were interested in what I was doing, and it just kind of morphed into just bikes after a while.
Yeah. So is that where Old Shovel comes from? I assume, like, you restored an old shovel at some point.
Yeah, actually, so when I was trying to think of channel names, my kids I use as a good touch point to know whether or not it's a good idea or not. Good sounding name. It kind of stems from a story. My father-in-law was a farmer up in Canada, and I had kind of stolen a forged old shovel from him, and that we were using in the garden. We were working on gardening one spring, and my wife thought we needed another shovel, ran down to the big box store, bought a Chinesium shovel, and it broke within a few hours. And it's kind of this story of, like, the thought is that an old tool, the best tool for the job isn't necessarily a new tool. And a lot of times an old refurbished tool is way better than what you have new. And really that fits exactly what I do with bikes too. Especially when we're talking steel hardtails from the 80s and 90s, that they kind of last forever. They're very durable. They do a lot of different things. And so it kind of fits that same feel. And I don't feel like there's any need to change the name to match. I think it's kind of a good story. So,
yeah. So there's, I've heard the phrase resto mod thrown around, and I feel like those are two different things, right? There's restoration, which I take it to mean kind of restoring it to, it's prior grandeur, period corrected or period correct parts, all those things. Whereas a mod is, just using it as a platform to build upon. What's your, like, how do you see it, and what do you like to do?
So, what's surprising is how much that's debated. Like it comes up, I get, like, some of the meanest comments are like, that's not a restoration. That's a modification or whatever. I'm a believer. I'm not keen on restoring things that I'm not going to use. Like, I like to use things, and I'm motivated to fix things up, to really, like I say at the end of my videos, to give them new life. And to me, new life means that they're useful when you're done. And a lot of times with the bikes, if I want to ride it, I'm more motivated to ride it when it has some of the things I really like, and some of those things are old and some of those things are new. And so, I do believe like a true restoration is making it as accurate to what it was originally. Sometimes restorations make them better than they were originally, like if it's something that was cast, a lot of times people will clean up the casting completely and make it all smooth and beautiful. And I think that adds value, but it's not a true restoration either. It's kind of modifying it a little bit. But a resto mod, I like when we're talking bikes is combining all the good things regardless of what era it comes from. And things that work well together, which is part of what I like about the late 90s mountain bikes. Really, there's this niche where it's really easy to fit lots of different things and really customize it and make it yours because it fits new and old and all kinds of different things. So that mid to late 90s is such a ideal era for bikes.
Right. So when people say get a 90s mountain bike, it's kind of a specific part of the 90s.
Yeah, I think I brought that out in my video. That was my point. There's a sweet spot that's even better, and I think that's that sweet spot that we're looking at is that late 90s where they're done messing around with trying out different things. I'm always surprised. Sometimes I get a bike, I'm like, I didn't even know that they did that. like, oh crap. I need to find some press fit bearings that fit a bike from 1991.
Yeah. I think that's a real challenge though, as a buyer that's not super well versed in 90s mountain bike history, is when you encounter these bikes on Craigslist or at a swap meet or at Goodwill, it doesn't have like the year necessarily emblazoned on it. So what are like some telltale indicators of something within this kind of golden age of the 90s?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. When I'm looking, so I go to thrift stores like multiple times a week. So I hit up the local thrift store. They know my name there. They have for years. And I look for when you're looking at old bikes, because I don't know all of the, like I grew up, I was a teenager and in the 90s, I was a teenager in the 90s and grew up and went to college. So I went to high school and college in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I don't know everything about 90s mountain bikes. I was working in the shop in the late 90s. And so I saw some stuff, but I'm always learning new things. Like I was saying at the beginning, like I brought a bike home. I thought it was normal and then find out it's got this weird bottom bracket or it's got 1 1/4 headset. But what I look for typically, there's the regular brands that have been around forever that, you're familiar with. I'm not looking for department store bikes typically. And I'd say 99% of the time, that's what I see at thrift stores. And you see a lot online on stuff too. And people thinking their full suspension hyper something is great, but it's not. But one thing that I've always been familiar with and kind of an equalizer is there's only so many component brands. And mm-hmm. when you're familiar with in the 90s, really you're looking at Shimano. There's not a whole lot else going on. In the 80s, there's some Sun Tour stuff that trickles into the early 90s, but and then the late 90s you get SRAM starting up and Grip Shift mm-hmm. and things like that. But so knowing just kind of the different componentry, that if you've got something that says Dior on it, Shimano Dior, it's probably a more solid bike. The steel tubing might be a little better than most. And mm-hmm. That's normally helpful. I do like for utility. I do like that later 90s bike that has a 1 1/8 headset. And there's some companies that were doing 1 1/8 at the beginning of the 90s, but not as many. Like GTs, you'll often find a 1 1/8 in the early 90s. But Konas that I like mm-hmm. to look at, most of them were 1 inch until I think 93 or 94, somewhere around there, they started doing 1 1/8. And so you get, if you choose one of those, you're kind of stuck with, there's not a lot you can do.
Right.
it's hard. It's really hard to find if you want to put a suspension fork, something that's 1 inch.
Yeah.
It's just not. And so you get people kind of converting things here and there, like shaving down the headset. What's that part that inserts into the steer tube? That's like the flange. Like they'll shave down the millimeter to make it fit. And I did a clunker where I shaved down the inside of the head tube to make a 1 1/8 fit. Now that one I felt comfortable because it was like super thick. Right. So I was like, I can shave off a millimeter and be okay.
Yeah, you said something. I watched your pros video this morning, and you had mentioned 8-speed as a good indicator, because by that time they would have sorted out the whole freewheel cassette kind of debacle.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, most 90s, you're not gonna, unless it's a really cheap bike, you're not gonna have a freewheel, but you're gonna have probably 7-speed until the later 90s. And yeah, that 8-speed is sweet because then you don't have to swap a hub or get new wheels. And it is hard. It's hard to find good 8-speed wheels just on their own. You know, they get snatched up here in Utah. They get snatched up pretty quick. And I do feel like we have more than, I feel like it's one of the best places in the country to find bikes.
Yeah, I feel it must be like, there must be like the magic spot that just draws all these amazing bikes toward you.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, because actually in prep for this, I looked at Missoula's Craigslist, and it was there was like 120 bikes, you know, and most of them weren't interesting. And and here on so we have a local classifieds, it's called like ksl.com, and people use that more than Craigslist, and so that's where I normally look. But when I've lived elsewhere, I've looked at Craigslist, but we probably get at least that many a day listed on there. And so like when I was putting together B-roll, I went and favorited a whole bunch of good steel bikes for under 200. And actually I didn't share all of them. I found some for like $35 that I was like, I gotta call those guys on Monday, because it was such a good deal. Like there were some cool bikes for like $35 and $50. And so
I waited, no kidding, like I waited for about a year, just like checking on the local Craigslist, you know, maybe once or twice a week. Trying to find something that would fit me, that would look like it had somewhat decent components and wasn't, you know, was like around the $100 or less price point. And for those 3 criteria to line up, it took a long time.
So that was why I actually avoided saying availability, because I would here it's easy, but I recognize that it's not. So I went to Sea Otter a couple of weeks ago, and I toyed with the idea of flying there, buying a bike off of Craigslist and riding it from like San Jose to Sea Otter. I toyed with that idea, and so I looked. I'm like, is this feasible? And actually, in the San Francisco, San Jose area and stuff, there's quite a bit. I was like, okay, yeah, it's similar. So I know there's other places in the country that are pretty good also, that kind of have that culture where someone's not trying to gouge you for everything, or they're just nothing. I would guess that in Missoula, there's still people that bike, but maybe they just don't sell stuff. Maybe there's a bunch of old people that are just hanging onto their 90s mountain bikes that they bought for that one bike ride, you know. But
there is a guy that reached out to me locally after I did that 90s mountain bike video, and I'm gonna do a video with him once the weather gets nice. But his thing is taking these vintage mountain bikes and welding on disc brake tabs.
Okay, yeah.
So I think we're gonna do a video where I put 4 brakes on a bike just for funsies.
And so I've done that a couple times too, and it's fun. I'm comfortable with it for myself. I wouldn't want to do it for someone else. I trust my welds, but I guess I don't trust them enough to like. I trust them enough for my kids, so I let them ride.
They're young and flexible. It's okay.
Yeah.
So what's your what's your relationship with the bike collective in town? Do you rest them on the bikes and then donate it there, or like how's that work out?
They're a local place that actually, even before I started bike YouTubing, I had donated a few bikes before to them. I really believe strongly in giving back to your community and being a part of your community. And I'm kind of a sucker for people that do stuff like that too. And the Bike Collective, I really like their mission. You know, we get a lot of refugee communities moving here and coming here into the Salt Lake area, and they do a lot for them. They do a lot for, you know, less affluent people, and they do a lot of stuff for youth. Like they have, you can train to become a certified bike mechanic by taking free classes there as a kid. I don't think they offer them for adults for free like that, but like a teenager can go and become like nationally accredited as a bike mechanic. And I just like awesome. that kind of ethos. So I don't have any like contractual things with them, but I do like hanging out at that shop. Like I really, really like it.
Yeah.
And the guys there are really everybody there is really cool. And so, yeah, I've been trying to do more with them. One, it makes it so I'm kind of a bike hoarder, and doing this YouTube channel has made it worse. so
I can relate.
Yeah, it's a nice place to get a few bikes, and that I've got for myself. One, and like the Ritchie that I got recently is just I'm in love with it. I'm sad that it broke the rims. I've got new rims to fix, but yeah, I'm just trying to do what I can to help them out.
Cool.
And to contribute and help further their cause. They've been liking what I've been doing because lately I've been doing a lot of Instagram reels of stuff in the shop. One, because it's helped build my Instagram page, and two, they're starting to get calls from people all around the world.
Yeah.
Like, can you ship me this? And they've shipped a few things. They've shipped a few frames to folks that have seen things from my Instagram reels, which is kind of cool and fun. And
yeah, those bikes never show up here. Like, I swear. Like the old Ibises and the Konas, it's like I've not seen one.
Yeah, it's super cool. I mean, the bikes that I have that I really, really love, that I've restored in the last couple of years, the majority have come from there. So I mean, at the thrift stores, I find pretty good bikes. It's rare that I find a really, really awesome, like I did a Cannondale T700, I think is what it was, recently. That was like, I basically just cleaned it. You know, I took it apart and cleaned it and put it back together, but it looked like it had hardly been ridden. It was $35, and yeah, I spent a bunch on the grip tape and the saddle, but that was because I was like, I normally budget like $300-ish to spend, and I'm like, well, I'll splurge on this one. So, and it's a beautiful bike. So that's a rare one. You know, I don't find stuff like that all the time at the thrift store. Most of the time, it's kind of entry-level mountain bikes, older, that are fun, cool, and very versatile and useful, but not completely like I can find at the Bicycle Collective, which means people are donating awesome bikes to them, which is good. That's how they make their bread and butter. That's how they fund their nonprofit, and it's cool.
Yeah, we've got a great resource like that in town called Free Cycles, and I went there a couple weeks ago to search for some parts for the Paramount, and they have some cool stuff. I've been like, do I want to blow it up, or you know, it's kind of like this spot. Yeah. But I am like, you know, there's this really nice component. I don't actually need it. Someone else could actually, you know, use it. And there's no reason for me to buy it. So like, I'm always trying to temper myself from just buying things for the sake of buying things.
I'm that way too. Actually, I kind of have hoarded a few of the good. When I'm there, I'm like, ooh, I don't have a need for this, but I'll buy it. Anyway, but then I think that same thing. I'm like, maybe I should leave that one for someone else.
Yeah. Do you think, I feel like it's you know, restoring vintage bikes or mountain bikes has always been, you know, a hobby for lots of people. Do you think it's getting more popular, or it's become more popular?
I get a lot of comments to that regard, that I think it was kind of the impetus of what happened in 2020. A lot of people sitting around. There are a lot of new people that weren't, or maybe did in the past, and they're coming back. Definitely, there's a group of people that have watched my videos and some others that it's inspired them to do that. So I do think there is kind of a revival. There's a few comments in my video today to stop talking about the 90s mountain bikes, because they don't want them to get all snatched up, and they don't want too many people to know the secret.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's kind of a resurgence. A lot of times I think it feels like those that like to fix up vintage hot rods and cars and stuff. It kind of is that same people who are nostalgic or love bikes and cars, or don't even have to be nostalgic. When they fall in love with cycling, they fall in love with the history of cycling too, which means old vintage bikes. And so there's kind of this interest in, if you're a mechanic or mechanically, if you have an aptitude to it, I think there's an appeal to doing some of that yourself and tinkering. And it's not as big of a commitment as like a hot rod or something like a car,
Right.
or even a motorcycle. It's a little more approachable.
Yeah. I'd be
So,
curious.
I do think it's growing.
Yeah. I'd love to know, if we were at Sea Otter, I would have loved to ask the park tool people to see if they saw like a spike in tool sales, because people were doing lots of DIY stuff. And did you get a chance to ask them that?
Yeah, I did. I knew that in talking with them that there was a surge. Initially, like a lot of companies, there's kind of like some trepidation of going forward with plans, and then quickly there was just a high demand for where they just couldn't keep up. It's similar to what I've talked with the folks from Paul's Components, and they said similar things. I think when you did your video, I think if I remember that came out also. But in talking with like Travis from Paul's Components, they had a similar, there's this surge of interest, and that surge also overlapped into the tools. So yeah.
Cool. Let's see. So we're 20 minutes in. We've got 240 people in the live stream.
Sweet.
If you guys have questions for Rob, leave it in the comment below or in the comment box. Have you discovered the comment tab on the right, Rob?
I'm watching on
Okay.
my computer here also, so I can multitask easier. Yeah.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
Let's dig into the pros and cons lists. I thought maybe we can go really quickly through your 5 and my 5 or 4 or whatever, and just go back and forth a little bit. Since you launched your video today, let's talk about yours. So
sure.
Your first point was nostalgia, which for me, like, I totally didn't have, because I was playing Street Fighter 2 instead of riding bikes. So that was like that's a pro that I can see if you were in that era and that was your thing. This is definitely, you're probably older. You've got the funds to buy all these cool bikes you didn't have back then.
I don't think actually. Yeah, that's maybe. I don't have lots of funds to buy all those bikes, but there is that nostalgia though, definitely. And for me, it definitely was the Kona. And I talked about that. Like I've had nice bikes since I was in college when I had a Kona Caldera. But part of it was a hardtail, a steel hardtail. I just loved a steel hardtail. I was riding full suspension for a while. And I found that I prefer hardtails over, for the type of riding I do. I don't really like to get air. Like I've broken a few things already, biking and other things, and I'm not interested in that. I'm a dad. I have responsibilities, and yeah. So I like to stay on the ground. I'm a big cross country rider and trail runner. I used to run ultra marathons in the past, and I really like the physical challenge of a really good climb and descent on nice single track. Like that's
right.
Just nice, flowy single track is what I like. With a little bit of technical here and there, but not much. So those kind of bikes appeal to me. A hardtail makes that a little more fun and interesting. In fact, even like last fall when I built up my my clunker. I loved that. So for me, but that the first time I really had that feeling was riding that Kona, and I wanted that feeling back. So there is that nostalgia, but I think there's also, for those that aren't, there is kind of, like I mentioned before, there's this love for cycling, and then you gain a love for the history of cycling. So
I agree.
yeah. So there's some of that. And I think there's that appeal that can be. I think, Russ, you can have some nostalgia for vintage bike stuff too. Like you did reading those books recently, you know.
Yes.
It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah. I'm going to combine your 2 and 3. So your other
Sure.
pros were versatility and customizability, which I totally agree with. Like I've not released my my pros list because I don't hate 90s mountain bikes. Like people took it the wrong way. But I do think, you know, like when I first got into bikes in the early aughts, you know, those were the bikes I learned to work on because they were super kind of transparent and honest, like no hidden parts. You could kind of, you know, problem solve your way around things. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. I think the appeal too, and I tried to bring this out in mine, is that there's that when I think about it, I think that mid to late 90s is that sweet spot where you have 8-speed wheels, you have 1 1/8 headsets, you have like a standard bottom bracket where you can swap out so much stuff, and hopefully a 27.2. So that the seat posts were still one of those areas that you get weird seat post sizes that are hard to find, and there's a few companies that make them. I've sanded a few seat posts down to fit, you know, but for the most part, there's a lot of versatility. And if you have 27.2 or higher, like a lot of Specialized in the late 90s were making actually the 30.1, and so you can fit. You could even fit a dropper post on some of those, you know, and so that's kind of cool. Although I think it's a different riding style on the bikes that now have dropper posts. They're set up with a slightly different geometry, and bigger wheels means you need to drop a little more and you ride different. So, there's so much that you can, like I can make a cross country type bike, or someone can take that same bike and turn it into a gravel type bike or into a townie, or swap out the fork and make it like a hauler or something, you know, and put racks on it and take it bike packing. There's just so many different things. And then aside from that, like I love sprayed out bike paint because I can, or just any paint. Like the idea is I'm not making a professional level paint job. I'm having fun making the bike mine and giving it a custom paint job is what I want to show. Because you can, and then it's yours. You get sick of it, paint it again, you know, paint it a new color next time. And it's just a fun way to keep that bike new and interesting and meeting the needs that you have. And I think 90s, because if you can find it for cheap, there's a lot more room for you to customize what you want to do. There are some things that are hard to find though. Like if you want a good mid 2000s suspension fork, they're disappearing. You know, so they're tough.
Do you have a good source for, let's say you buy a mid to late 90s mountain bike and it's got a suspension fork, but you want to run it rigid? Like where do you go?
If I want to, I go to the Salt Lake Bicycle Collective. But actually, and that's a hard thing too. Like if I want a straight steer tube with a threadless headset, they actually don't have many of those. Most of the forks that are just random available there are actually threaded ones, which are kind of hard too, because you need one that's the right length and with the right thread pitch and all of that. So that the fork is a tough one, but there are new 26-inch forks out there that you can get too. But you can also put like a 27.5 fork on it that would kind of feel like adjusted for suspension. But when you're tweaking stuff, it's always going to change the way it rides and feels. You may have to experiment with the stem length and stuff like that to get the balance right. And there could be some tweaking, but for me, that's half the fun. So it's trying to figure out what works and yeah. So That's a tough one, and a suspension fork is even harder. It's just hard. I've bought several off of eBay, and most of the time they're not cheap. It's hard to grab up a good fork for around, like if you want an old Sid or Fox float or something like that, you're gonna easily spend $300 on eBay unless you can find something locally or some. Yeah, it's tough. There just aren't many, and so it's on that one the cost can be higher.
Right. Well, let's so your last pro, I'm just gonna dovetail it into my first con, which is the issue of like affordability and price.
Yeah.
So how about you give your pro take on it, and I'll give my con take on it.
So I look at it as one. I do think affordable bikes are able to find, but as I've mentioned, I think in your area, Missoula, there's not a lot of selection, so that makes it harder. And so if you're looking at eBay, something more universal, you're gonna pay a lot more. It's gonna be a lot harder. eBay is more like, people have found that if you part out these 90s mountain bikes, you can make more money than if you sell it whole. And so the price is going to be a lot higher. That said, it's still, if you're comfortable spending $1,000 on a new bike, you can find one for a lot less. If you look harder, I'm sure there's bikes laying around at garage sales and things like that takes a little more effort to find. But if you're looking for that specific type of bike, it's really hard. If you're open to what comes to you, I kind of feel like some of the bikes that have come to me, I felt like they've found me rather than I found them. They're like, I want to live. I want to live again. And so when you put it out there that you want to find something like that, I think they start to show up. People start to let you know. But a lot of bikes I've found, I'm just surprised. Like, I got them, like I have a Paramount like yours, looks very similar. And I was actually surprised when I wrote it. I was like, this is going to suck. Like it doesn't, like, I didn't feel like it had a different cockpit feel. It was a lot longer, but when I wrote it, I was like, actually, this really performed really well. The steel felt really quite supple. I don't know what it was about it, but I was very surprised at how well it rode. And I was like, oh, cool. This is a nice bike. Maybe I need to fix this frame up a little more. But if you open up your mind to trying new things, I think there's a lot out there to be had. But it may depend on where you live, but still, like, if you spend $400, if you buy a bike for $100, spend even $300 fixing it up, you're still just at and around that department store bike range. And I think you have a much more durable, long-lasting, and more custom and unique and special to you bike, that you put together and you put some love into it, even if you're paying a mechanic to do some of it or whatever it might be, So I feel like there's a cost of entry. You can do it for cheap, or you can do it for a little bit more, and it's still less expensive than something new.
Right.
So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I do think like you have to have that open mindset. It's kind of like a good analogy to me is like, if you go to a thrift store looking for clothes, you can't be hoping to find that very specific shirt in that colorway in your size. It's got to be, this is, it is what it is.
Yeah, you're not like, do you have this in another color?
Right.
Yeah. No, and I'm totally like, before Club Ride started augmenting my wardrobe, I could say, like, most of my plaid shirts are from like thrift stores. So like, I'm very much a thrift store guy. I grew up that way. Yeah. But yeah, you kind of let what comes to you, and you're like, hey, this works. This is cool.
Yeah. So I did in my pros video, which has yet to be released. It's going to pop on Tuesday. At the end, I kind of did a price summary of what it cost me to get the Paramount into a rideable shape. And like, one thing that I did that I don't think a lot of people do, and maybe it's just me, like, I factored in my time. like how much time it
Oh,
took me
yeah.
times Montana minimum wage, not even my YouTuber hourly rate, which isn't that much more than the Montana hourly wage. But once I factored that in, it ended up being about $1,000. I probably put like close to 450, almost, yeah, about 450 in, and then I estimated maybe about 50 hours of time between looking, researching, buying something, it not working, buying something else.
Oh yeah.
I feel like that's something that doesn't get accounted for a lot. I remember someone mentioned that RJ the bike guy did a video trying to answer this question where he finds the cool bikes he gets to work on the channel. And in one video, he drove like 100 miles to 5 different thrift shops and came away with nothing. And that's a sunk cost. That's gone.
No, that's true. Yeah, that's true. My question to you then is, on your other bikes that aren't 90s bikes, do you do the same?
Yeah, but I spend way less time working on them.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Because like when I think when we're talking about customizing bikes, a lot of people do that. There's something about changing out parts, whether they're better or not, that makes it yours, and you feel like you're kind of bonded and more connected. And doing that with 90s bikes, I think, is, if you're looking at used parts or even new parts, there's a connection that comes. And I think people that like to do that on their new bikes too. And so I see that as like kind of a parallel cost, but the cost of entry, I feel like, is a little less. But it does depend on, I think it does depend on the market in where you live, and what's available and what you're willing to work on. But there is a versatility that I think there's value, and there's a lot of inexpensive bikes to be had. But if you really want to put Paul's brakes on your bike, it's never going to be cheap. And if you want the retro ones, it's going to be even more,
Yeah.
I'd love to see what a old Paul's derailleur feels like.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a guy on the Instagram I follow. I think his Instagram is Bike Jerks. It's a guy that started All City, the brand, and left.
Oh, okay.
And he finds all these amazing finds at different yard sales, and he found a Paul front derailleur, which he's selling for like $500. apparently that's the going rate for an old Paul front derailleur. So go figure.
Yeah. So I mean, there's certain things that are rare, unique, handmade, custom, that there's a lot of value to. In fact, actually, at the Salt Lake Bicycle Collective, they had a bike in that I was there, and I was like, "Ooh, I need to talk to the head mechanic and see if they'll let me have that one." Because normally they like to fix them up and sell them. They don't normally let the unfixed up ones go for sale, but they have to me a few times. I probably shouldn't have said that. But but I was like, oh, that's a sweet bike. But for them, there was actually a lot more value to that. They have stuff on eBay, and they parted it out and made way more parting it out than keeping it whole. So I mean, there's some value in those old, really collectible parts that are super cool. But functionality wise, they're not really a whole lot different. But some Rasta anodized is super cool, like it's awesome, but at the same time, like, you can find whole bikes with just Dior components, and there's some cool functionality to those. Clean them up, put some I guess if you want to count your time in polishing cranks, then if I counted that, I've spent hours sometimes polishing a crank that's worth like $5. But when I'm done, I've put like 5 hours of sanding and polishing into it. So I don't know.
Right. So I watched your last video with the seized seat posts. Like, how long did that take?
So I had hoped actually to get that bike done like in January. I had started on it. I kind of pulled it out. I'm like, oh crud, this is so stuck. And it was from the Salt Lake Bicycle Collective. They knew it was stuck and had tried themselves to get it out. And I don't know how long I spent. It took, like, I followed, and I've seen that Eric's on here. I've looked over and Spindat, he's on there. I had seen his gallium thing. And so that was kind of in the back of my mind. I'm like, that'd be cool to try if I have to. And
And you had to.
and I had to. I needed to do that, or like the lye or caustic soda or whatever method. And that, when I've looked at it, I've never tried it. It just looks really, really messy. And I'm like, ugh. I don't like toxic chemicals, which is why I normally will like sand the bike down and scrape off the paint when I'm redoing it, rather than than clearing it off other ways. So that even with the gallium, that was an all day. I think I started on a Friday evening. I did a few chunks and got a few of the big chunks, because you put it in, wait a couple hours for it to like ionize or something. It's doing something, because it's not like melting or fusing or dissolving. And then chipped away, and then I let some sit overnight because I like to sleep, and then came back in the morning. And I don't think I finished getting that seat pot out. So I mean, and I only had like maybe 5 inches to get out, maybe less than that. I don't know. It took until the evening, so it took all day. It was all day coming in for every 2 hours and chipping away everything I could, and then another 2 hours and chipping away. And that's not as evident in the video, and because I don't talk, I don't say. I'm not like 4 hours later.
Right.
Yeah. But it was an all day thing. It took all day to get that seat post down.
Well, you
and that was
changed
after
shirts,
I'd tried
so I knew that like a certain amount of time had passed.
yeah. Well, and even the sawing it off, I saw it. I'd work on it because I have like a full-time job and I have kids. I'm a scoutmaster. I try to squeeze in things when I can, and on Saturdays are like the only day that I get like long amounts of time to work on stuff. But I'll squeeze in stuff on weeknights, and so it was on and off for like, I think 6 weeks trying to get that seat post out. Well, because I'd be like, I started on it, and then I was like, okay, I'm not going to finish this one for this week's video, so I'm going to have to do something else. So then I put it to the side and then come back to it when I'm waiting for paint to dry or something like that, and come back and forth. And so it was on and off for a while.
Right.
I really hope I don't have another seat post stuck like that again. It was really bad. And
so at one point you started torching it. Was that to activate the gallium, or what was that for?
Oh yeah, so that was just with my like heat gun.
Okay.
And yeah, that was just to keep it's winter time ish still here in Utah. Sometimes like I was at a scout camp yesterday and it was blizzarding, so it was super fun. So it gets cold, and so the gallium, I think at room temperature it's liquid, but it was getting a little cold, so I wanted to make sure that it was staying. That was just to keep it melted or liquid form. So
right. Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah. There's probably a few things like. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to say there's probably a few other things I could have tried. The Fat Chance bikes, I didn't know this before. That bottom bracket is a solid tube. There's no holes in it, so I couldn't flip over the bike and fill it with something and let it soak and sit, and a few other things that I just couldn't try. Or maybe I could. I mean, I could have filled up the whole seat post, but but there's probably things. There was lots of suggestions that sounded great in the comments.
That's where I get all my video ideas, is the comments.
Yeah. I've learned so much about bike mechanics from the comments section.
Yeah. I've learned that everyone is a bike mechanic, apparently.
Yeah. There's certain things that some people say you shouldn't lube and some say you should, and I kind of stick with what the part guys tell me. So,
right.
But there's lots of different opinions. But yeah.
So I guess let's see how we're 45
Have we
minutes
gone?
in.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. We don't have to go through the rest of my list. I will say tools after watching your your seed posts. There's like
Yeah.
kind of basic tools, and then there's this whole level of oh crap, things are stuck. I got to pull out the big guns tools, which is
Yeah.
could potentially add up and get messy.
No, that's true. Yeah. I mean, but if you're tinkering on anything, I mean, even with new bikes, you get a bottom bracket, you're like, do I have, even when I was with the Park Tool guys, when we were, so at Sea Otter, I was helping fix bikes for people at their booth. And yeah, like someone would show up and it'd be like, what bottom bracket? And we were trying to find the right bottom bracket tool. And this is the Park Tool, right? And there was, I think there was at least one that were like, you need to go back to, I don't remember what bottom bracket, go to their booth, see if they have the tool for it. Yeah. So yeah. But so new bikes, there's that same thing too. So, I mean, if you want to fix your new bike, you probably need to get tools too. That would be my rebuttal to your tool comment.
I'd say
but
that,
you might have them. So
yeah, I think the biggest tool that doesn't get discussed is having a garage or space. Like we've, this is the first time we're renting. This is the first time we've lived in the space. I actually had a garage so I can do all these shenanigans for YouTube. But prior to that, like there's only so much that Laura would tolerate me having a bike in the middle of our living room.
Yeah, and I've seen those videos. And yeah, it is nice. It is nice to have a garage. Yes.
Well, let's go to the comments section. You guys in the YouTube comments there's 309 of you in the live stream. If you guys have questions for Rob or myself about resto modding 90s mountain bikes, I'll have Rob mostly answer them.
Sure.
Is there anything in there that popped out in the comment stream?
I'm scrolling through here.
I saw that someone had put a comment like 90s mountain bike equals Riv, and it made me realize that's actually one of the things I really like about Rivendell bikes. They have that same honesty and transparency in working with them that the 90s mountain bike has. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through.
Come on, guys, ask some questions.
There's lots of comments on the seat posts because that's what we were just talking about.
So do you have any fear that the vintage bike stuff is gonna go the way of like Leica cameras, where everything becomes super expensive and exclusive, and it just becomes like a hobbyist game rather than something that the regular folks can partake in?
I really hope it doesn't. I hope not. But I think, I mean, when you're restoring vintage things at a certain point, the supply becomes smaller. And I think we do already see a bit of that with even the high-end bikes, but still, they're less than the high-end new bikes. So we haven't reached the point where I think we have with some cars. Right. If you want a sweet Toyota Supra, I don't know. Actually, it might be around the same price as the new one too, because the new one's not cheap. But I think that those prices will go up in scarcity. I do see a lot more scarcity with like the suspension forks. I'm happy though to see a few companies like I restored a Marzocchi bomber, like a Z2 bomber, a year and a half ago. And at the time, I couldn't find seals or anything. And now there's a company out there, Dr. Marzocchi, who's kind of brought that back, and he's sourced a bunch of parts, and he's having parts made. And so there's kind of a resurgence happening that maybe will help with some of those forks. But I do think that will increase the price because there is, we're not talking about new old stock anymore. We're talking about new stuff being made, and they'll continue with the market value. But there's some interest in that. But at the same time, it's not like we're going to have more Z2 Marzocchi bombers being made from the 90s, so as things disappear and maybe get lost, I think it will go up. I hope it doesn't get too crazy though. But I think the general run of the mill, like if you want a 90s mountain bike that was just spec'd with Dior parts, I think those will still be feasible as long as they're still around. So
yeah. Let's see. We've got I don't know how to highlight this, but thank you, eBike Mike, for the super chat. Here's a question from Sean. If you could ride only one 90s mountain bike, what would it be? Would it be the Kona?
Yeah. It would probably be an old Kona for all the reasons I listed in my video. For me, that's a very nostalgic brand. It would be a Kona with a bunch of race-based components because that was nostalgic for me with the Marzocchi bomber. And
you said something in your pros video, like I'm not super versed in 90s mountain bike history lore, but you said, look for bikes that were designed by Joe Murray because he was kind of ahead of its time. Like what did he bring to the design of the 90s mountain bike that you like so much?
So Joe Murray was a pro racer who then helped start design. He would a lot of kind of the North Shore bikes, and I'm not the most versed either. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on big lore, but Joe Murray was behind the designs for Konas and for Voodoos, and they're similar, more of a sloped down tube, a slightly more aggressive hardtail that was good on. Just good for the kind of cross country and stuff that they were doing back then. A little more aggressive. It was a little ahead of their time. A lot of companies then started to do that more also in the early 2000s, and the geometries were just a little bit more similar to that. And if you look at the early 90s mountain bikes, like your Schwinn Paramount, it was very much still a consistent of maybe the late 80s type mountain bikes. Geometry wise, very horizontal top tube, and even just it just was a different feel, and you even ride them a little bit different, the 80s bikes, even though I do like I have my Ritchie Ascent. It's an 87 Ritchie Ascent. On my local trails, my fastest Strava times up and down are on that Ritchie Ascent, which just blows me away. It still blows me away because I thought for sure it would be slower on the downhill because it's rigid. It's just slammed, but it's like riding a time trials bike, It's a very aggressive geometry, and those Joe Murray they're a little bit more laid back, a little higher stack in the front, slope down tube, a little more comfortable, starting to feel like a dirt jumper. You can wheelie them, although that's not my big thing. It's easier to wheelie those bikes. They're nimble, quick, and I just really liked the feel. So for me, that's the appeal. I really, really like that. Really modern 29er hardtails are very similar geometries to those. They're starting to be more aggressive now with the more sloped down tubes and things like that. But a lot of your standard, I'd say in the last 5 years, those hardtails are very similar. They're just 29ers. So
riding the Paramount, it was when I picked it up from the guy, like it looks visually small, right? Tiny head tube. And then I hopped on it and I was like, why does it look so small but feel so long? Like, I don't get what's going on here. Like I almost didn't buy it when I rolled up to the house and the guy was holding it, because I was like, there's no way that's gonna
be too small for me.
Yeah, but when I took it home, I've not released this video yet, but I superimpose it against other bikes I have, and it's actually longer than like my Rivendell or my Crust, by a couple of centimeters. but they did everything that they could to not slope the top tube on that bike, and have like a super aggressive, like a stack to reach. So that's the first thing that was like, that's kind of an odd, design choice. Like not knowing anything about 90s mountain bike design, but like coming from 2022 and looking at it.
Yeah, I agree. It does look, a little. They look smaller. I agree. For some reason, they do look smaller. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking I might do a video on, if you're gonna go and buy one, like what you should bring with you to when you buy a vintage bike is like a tape measure and a caliper to check the seat post tube, and just take the top tube measurement rather than like just going off of the nominal like 17, 18 inch, whatever, off the seat tube.
Yeah. It like, especially if you didn't ride in that era, it's harder to know what should fit.
Right.
and if you're going to do, like, you've already modified your bike quite a bit and you've been messing with it. But when you tried it out, it's not like it had the bars that you're using now on it. And so you don't know. So some of
like little fixie bars that were like this.
Yeah, that's how it feels when you got like 580 handlebars. It's with a 120 stem or something. It's just, it feels, in the day that felt normal to me to have those narrow handlebars, and you kind of get used to riding it. So part of it's that too, being used to riding that type of bike. But not knowing if you're planning on modifying a bike, it's really hard to know how it's going to feel when you're buying it, and it's got its vintage cockpit on it and vintage components if you're thinking of upgrading. But like I said, when you're thinking about those, there are certain things, like if you want to put a 1x10 drivetrain on it, it's probably a good idea unless you want to try to find a 26-inch wheel set, which I think someone asked, where do you find those? I'm like, classifieds.
I think Crust Bikes actually, they're selling a 26-inch wheel set with a dynamo front hub, rim brake for like $500, which is actually
well, but when you're looking at I would say I've done it a few times. I've built my wheel sets, but that's even for even like some mechanics, that's scary, building a wheel set. There's a lot there. And so, but 26-inch wheels, used ones are hard to find. New ones are hard to find. Even just rims, like trying to find rims for my Ritchie when I crack the rims, it's tough. It's tough to find rims like for rim brakes, in 26. So there's not a lot of companies out there. There's companies now making 26-inch like disc wheel set still, and you can find some of those. Like Spank makes some good. I've built a few rims tubeless that way and set them up, but it's hard to find those 26-inch wheels. So hopefully it's best to find what you need on the bike.
Right. So here's a question from Karina. Is there any old tech you wish would come back?
That's a good question. I have to think about that. On my Ritchie Ultra, it has the Campy cranks and brakes. I think it would be cool if there was still Campy mountain group sets. I think that'd be cool. There's a certain finesse and beauty that comes out of Italy for some reason. I think would be cool. But as far as functionality, I'm like, I don't know. I actually no, there is. So I really, and it kind of hasn't gone away, but just in the late 90s, there was a lot of real high-end steel frames being built. And there was a lot more effort put into really lightweight, supple steel frames in high production. I think we still get that in kind of the custom frame building world, which isn't approachable for everyone. But there was some just really great frame sets. I really love the bikes that I have that have Reynolds tubing on them, for instance, and some of those older bikes. So I'd love to see that more in production I'd love to see more production steel mountain bikes, modern ones. There's a few companies out there, but some company they'll have maybe one steel model, like Kona has their Hanzo steel, and Niner has a few steel ones. They're consistently making those, but I'd love to see more lightweight steel made, like they were in the 90s.
So Jonathan says, bring back friction shifting. This I agree with. Actually, looking at my personal stable, all my bikes right now are friction shifting. And it's just it's so nice to just like
doing it.
Yeah, I love being able to one have a wheel set that has like 10 speeds, one that has 11 and 9, and as long as the cogs are relatively the same, just throw it in. Yeah, that is one thing like I hope Microshift keeps doing. I know Riv has their silver shifters. I hope they keep making. One of the things I really love about kind of vintage bikes and vintage components is, you run into them at the bike co-op. They're maybe 20, 30 years old, if not older, and they still work.
Yeah,
like looking at electronic components,
kind of cool.
Yeah. Like, I don't think electronic components are going to be like that. It's going to go the way of, consumer electronics. Like, how often do you see like a Walkman, that's in functioning condition that can still take a charge or whatever? It's,
Yeah, with all the unique batteries also and charging methods and like even recharging a battery. How long is that battery, even if it's just rechargeable and not replaceable? How long is it going to last? And yeah.
Or even like SRAM's new blips, like they're literally disposable. There's no way to charge them. They say they have like a 3-year battery life, and after that you can, recycle them or something. But that's like, I don't know. That when that came out, that made me really sad, and that actually started me back on my retro grouch trend. I feel like a lot of like older tech that's still super usable. I don't know. Someone has to sing their praises. I feel like there's going to be a channel shift on my end where it's not like, yay, all the new things all the time.
Yeah. I just saw a comment, someone asking, gravel bikes are just 90s mountain bikes. Changed my mind. What do you think on that, Russ? I have an opinion. I'd like to know yours. I'm interested.
Well, after testing about 70 gravel bikes and trying to turn a 90s mountain bike into one, they're very different beasts.
Yeah,
like just from
I'd agree too.
I mean, just the geometry is really different. Aside from just like the tech, like brakes aside, wheel size and tire makes a big difference. And like just the kind of assumed posture that you're going to be riding on the bike, it's not the same.
I think part of that comes from that. Geometries are similar-ish. I think it's more the use is what you're riding is similar. Is what and the
wheels in the chain.
Well, no, like riding on fire roads and stuff, dirt roads and fire roads, is kind of that bread and butter of 90s mountain biking had a lot of. There wasn't as many. There weren't like bike parks in a lot of places, and your local trails were often sometimes too narrow, or trail runners. There wasn't as many mountain bike trails back then, so a lot of fire roads were what you're riding, or stuff that bikes were made to be ridden on that. But I do think that the stance is different. I've done a few bikes where I've taken those 90s mountain bikes and put drop bars on it, and it makes it I think a gravel bike, but it's not saying that the gravel bikes are the same. I think actually what I'm more interested in, someone commented this in my video also, was late 90s and early 2000 hybrid bikes that are 700C wheels, had V brakes, but were set up for a flat bar geometry.
Mhm.
It's those I'm building one of my next videos will building one for a nonprofit shop in Bentonville that they're going to use for a fundraiser. And yeah, I was like, let's find a steel 90s hybrid bike and turn it into a gravel all around kind of bike and try things out. And I think those are actually closer
Mhm.
to the gravel bikes. Like I think they're
Right.
a lot closer. What's hard
I'd
is
agree.
to try to get the handlebars and the stack. Like if you're wanting drop bars, trying to get the same because they're designed differently, trying to get that to work. I think those are actually closer. So
Yeah, the
so
new meme is going to be gravel bikes are just late 90s dad bikes.
exactly. Yeah. Late 90s dad bikes or gravel bikes are just late 90s dad bikes. We're just trying to make ourselves feel cooler about
There you
them.
go. See, spin dad
Yeah.
approved.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So
Cool.
yeah.
Well, we've been yapping for about an hour. Gonna take us home here. So, Rob, thanks so much for your time and indulging me in this super heated debate.
Oh, this was awesome. I was excited when you reached out, Russ. I was like, sweet, this will be fun. Yeah. It was good.
Cool. If you guys aren't familiar with Old Shovel already, check out his YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the description below. He just posted his 5 pros, and I'm going to post my 5 pros probably on Tuesday. Thanks everyone for joining us on the live stream. And I forgot, this will also be available as a podcast brought to you by Arkell Bags. They've decided to sponsor our podcast, so they'll pay for the time to turn it into just an audio thing. With that, everybody, thanks, good night, and as always, keep the supple side down.
Awesome.